Hi, everybody. This is Erik. Tonight, or today, we're going to, depending on wherever you're watching this, we're going to be talking about step one. Step one is the beginning, but it's something I use all the time. I'm not perfectly good at it. In fact, I need to be better at it. But step one is we admitted we were powerless over alcohol or drug addiction or compulsive spending or sexual addiction or compulsive overeating or compulsive gambling or codependency or fixing others. In fact, there's a lot of things we're powerless over. So we're powerless over our addiction and our lives became unmanageable. So there's two pieces to step one to have it really be a step. One has to admit powerlessness, that I can't stop using, which is hard for us because we're almost afflicted with this sickness and this mentality that if I just work harder, I can do this. But we also have to connect the dots with how is this harming me? How is my behavior or this drug or alcohol harming me? Is it making me depressed? Is it causing me to be grumpy or resentful or fearful in the long run? Is it causing me marital problems or relationship problems? Is it affecting my parenting? Is it affecting my work? Is it affecting job performance? What else could it affect? Oh, spiritual life, sexual life. There's so many ways that it affects us. And I'm not sure people really actually get the experience of how much effect it's had until they've actually stopped using by God's grace. And then they look back and go, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? So we'll jump into the book here. Alcoholics Anonymous. There it is. And we'll start at the very beginning. The first foreword, it says, we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. For them, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. Okay. So notice the wording there. It's precise. It has to do with recovered. This idea of recovering, or I'm in recovery. I'm not totally against that, but I do think there's a problem with that because it just encourages relapse. And I know there's meetings that don't even emphasize sobriety date anymore. They emphasize your recovery date. And I'm not talking about like Essanon or Al-Anon or Gam-Anon or some of the Anons. I'm talking about addictions where it doesn't really matter. I mean, there's a sense that there's people there for 20 years and not really sober. Trying not to put anybody down when I say this. It's with humility. It's just that the emphasis is not there. And it's important to know that the message of hope is that people recover from this. And that's how they did. So there is a doctor. We'll start with the doctor's opinion, which is another section of the book, the very beginning. And this is by Dr. Silkworth. It's called The Doctor's Opinion. And he goes on, and he's going out on a limb to say that this is something that a spiritual program can arrest. It can make a person completely well. It says, the physician who at our request gave us this letter has been kind enough to enlarge upon his views in another statement which follows. In this statement, he confirms what we who have suffered alcoholic torture must believe, that the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind. It did not satisfy us to be told that we could not control our drinking just because we were maladjusted into life, that we were in full flight from reality, or were outright mental defectives. These things were true to some extent, in fact, to a considerable extent with some of us. But we are sure that our bodies were sickened as well. In our belief, any picture of the alcoholic which leaves out this physical factor is incomplete. The doctor's theory is that we have an allergy to alcohol. Sounds pretty simple. Well, it was revolutionary at the time. And I run into people now that even really believe that it's just a matter of willpower and these people just have moral problems. And we now know, I mean, there's enough evidence to suggest that there are certain enzymes that alcoholics don't have, that there seems to be a genetic link. With even sexaholism and compulsive overeating, the cannabinoid system, the system that helps feeling satisfied, might be different for those that struggle in those areas. Think about it this way: cannabis, which in some way helps people who can't eat because they're feeling sick, nauseated, helps them develop hunger. So that feeling of satisfied could be off. And it could explain a lot with sexaholics and alcoholic, or not, sexaholics and I just had it, sexaholics and compulsive overeaters. By the way, those interested in early church, it's not by accident in talking about the passions that gluttony and lust were in the same category, which had to do with the appetitive appetite passions there, parts of the soul. So he goes on to talk about this, and it's worth reading. It really is. And read with a pencil or a pen. Now, this approach is these allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. If you're out there and you really don't want an abstinence approach, it's like it's fine, because it's everybody gets to live their life the way they want to. Alcoholics, though, feel that they've done a lot of experimenting and they find that they're best off not drinking again, because they just don't seem to have the ability to drink in moderation. In fact, it seems that it gets worse with time. One can even not drink for 20 years, and then if they pick it up again, it's worse. It's on the lower rung, as if they had always used. It says, and once having formed the habit and found they cannot break it, once having lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human, their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. That's my experience. That we had self-confidence, but it's gone. And reliance on human things, it's not going to work. Frothy emotional appeal, think codependency there, and family members appealing, and tears, and seldom suffices. The message we can interest and hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight. In nearly all cases, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their life. Okay. Men and women drink. So we're on the page of XXVI. Okay, so that's 16 or 26 in Roman numeral. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. And this would be the same for workaholics, sexaholics, compulsive gamblers, overeaters. Yeah, that's why we do these things, because we like the effect. The sensation is so elusive that while we admit it's injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit. We'll talk about minimizing and normalizing. These are defense mechanisms, and in some way I should do a separate video on them. But there is this aspect that people not really ready to connect the dots. It's just where we are if we're there. We say this is normal. We say that everybody drinks like this. We say the same thing about compulsive overeating, that lots of people struggle with weight, and we may not even see it that way. That we just see it as that. Let's see, my point was, yeah, this overeating life seems like the normal one. Okay. The sensation is so elusive, and we admit it's injurious. Like people say, well, everything causes cancer. That's a sad coping mechanism, really, because it means that we're so jaded to the connecting the dots with the eating that we really don't care about the effects. Whether we lose legs and limbs because of diabetes, or you lose use of our kidneys, heart disease, cancer, sadly enough, we do care when it is there. I've worked with people that struggle with weight to where they have the cancer, but the doctor can't do the surgery, and so they're quickly trying to lose weight. I've worked with people that were dieting all their life, and Overeaters Anonymous is not dieting. Because dieting is a human knowledge that will, with research and studies. I mean, do you think there is a lot of research out there on overeating? There is lots and lots. So I would say that the way to do that is to admit powerlessness, and our lives are unmanageable. And we have to admit that it is injurious. It says they are restless, irritable, discontented, unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks which they see others taking with impunity. After they succumb to the desire again, as so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops, they pass through the well-known stages of the spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over, and unless this person can experience an entire psychic change or spiritual change, there is very little hope of his recovery. Yeah, let's talk about this, okay, for a moment. And I am going to be critical here, but I think it's with a purpose. The critique is that we have a huge amount of therapists, treatment centers, programs, things advertised on TV to help people get better. And we have to ask ourselves, is it really working? At a grand scale, like if I have, I'm trying to think of a medical complaint that's easy to treat, that we know what to do. Like if I break my leg, we know what to do there. It's not like it sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. No, we know what to do. I'm most likely going to have it set or put in a cast, and it's going to heal. But the success rate with treatment centers is not high. And the addicts are conveniently blamed for it not working. Okay. If we go back in time with the Alcoholics Anonymous program, they had 50 to 75% success rate. It was so powerful back then that that's why Rockefeller offered them lots of money, and they prayed about it, and they said, no, money's going to ruin this thing. There were magazine articles and radio stories. Something miraculously had happened, and that it was a spiritual program of action. As treatment centers began to develop more and more and more in the 50s and 60s, what happened? That stuff, I'm putting it mildly, started to get into the 12-step groups. It was later in 1960 that groups began to be formed. In the early days, for the first 20, 30 years, it was more like a person giving a testimony of what the steps and God had done for them. And all the chairs were facing forward. And the emphasis was not on sharing my problems. And if I understand my problems and I get emotional and mental support from you and tools and ideas, that all of a sudden I'll be better. No, the emphasis was on listening and learning. And they went through the steps with their sponsor in a short amount of time. I won't even use the word quick anymore, because quick defines whether something's slow or quick. No, we'll just say a short amount of time, anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 or 3 weeks. No one really did it slow. And that's another problem we see, infiltrating itself into meetings. And let's see. Irritable, restless, discontent. That's the natural state of the addict or the alcoholic. And what the 12 steps does is help us heal from that. We start to be content. We start to become able to be still. No more running, no more geographical escapes. We're not as irritable. Our nerves are more calm. I do believe we're somewhat born this way, with nervous energy, sensitive, and that somehow our drink will calm us down. And that's why we're so prone to it. With most addictions, there is this aspect of craving. And there is some mental obsession that we start thinking about it and we're just obsessed. Okay. So, on the other hand, as strange as it may seem to those who do not understand, once a psychic change, again, a spiritual experience has occurred, that very same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems he despaired of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol or the addiction of your choice. The only effort necessary being that required to follow a few simple rules. Notice it doesn't say effort to try to stop using. I'm not saying there's not any effort, but the emphasis was on experiencing the steps. And it says, men have cried out to me. Me, who is me? This is the doctor speaking. In sincere and despairing appeal, doctor, I cannot go on like this. I have everything to live for. I must stop, but I cannot. You must help me. Faced with this problem, if a doctor is honest with himself, he must sometimes feel his own inadequacy. Although he gives all that is in him, it is often not enough. One feels that something more than human power is needed to produce the essential psychic change. And there's that spiritual experience, and it's essential. And a humble doctor understands he can't fix this with more medicines. Okay. And I see that a lot. I mean, even in recent days and working with recent people. They come in, the doctor has given them all these medications to fix their problem. It's just more of the same problem, because addiction says, I don't like how I feel right now. Give me something to feel different. That's really what an addiction really is I can't tolerate fear or anxiety or depression or anger or irritability or ambiguity, or I'm too tired or I'm too pepped up. Give me something. By the way, this is my fake coffee, but give me something to feel better. And often then recovery, they want it to be quick fix too. Just give me something to feel better. Now, there is some really powerful experiences that people get through in a few weeks, and that is quicker, especially. But it's not quick fix. I've seen stories of drug addiction where a person has struggled for years, like maybe 3 treatment centers. They've tried everything. And maybe they've gone to 12 steps and gone to Narcotics Anonymous, NA, but never really experienced the steps in the AA book and simplicity. And there's always that addiction or monkey on the shoulder, just always trying to make them use. And they're white knuckling it. And we don't even know when we're white knuckling it oftentimes, but they actually just go through the motions of the steps. Sincerely take steps 1, 2, and 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, and then do 8 and 9, and then 10, 11, and 12. And all of a sudden that compulsion just leaves. They are flabbergasted. They are amazed that God is really doing for them what they could not do for themselves. They have had such a spiritual experience where then they realize, wow, it was really a waste of time. The treatment, the medications, the visit to the doctors. There is a joke. It's like, how much money did your AA book cost? I don't have it right here, but how much did your AA book cost? And people say, oh, $60,000, meaning they had to pay $60,000 with all this other treatment, and until they find the admitted powerlessness. So step 1 for me, there is this list in my mind of all the ways I've tried to stop. I've tried therapies, I've tried medicine, I've tried, well, acupuncture, and I'll just exercise. I will just white knuckle it. I will use star charts. I will use anniversaries. I'll use remorse. I will just feel really, really bad about it. And that'll make me stop. That's kind of experimental. There's a lot that goes on with that. People in the disease with denial will say things like, they say, I don't know how I can be an addict. I mean, I've quit opiates like 5 times. So then I say, well, maybe you are an addict because you have quit opiates 5 times. What I'm saying is that how many times can you stop and start again? That's the problem. We can stop, some of us. We just can't stay stopped. And the addiction is so sneaky, it tricks us into denial so we don't see the big picture. And it tricks us into not even seeing how it's affecting our lives, how it creeps up. Today, as I stepped on the scale, it's like I still have a ways to go. But I realized if I never stepped on a scale, I'm not going to get the feedback. I'm really not going to know how much I weigh or how little I weigh, or there's no feedback. Addiction recovery is like a scale. Specifically, where am I dysfunctional today? Where am I in that? if I don't want to look at myself or examine myself or ask me simple questions like, how might my substance or this behavior be harming me, I'm not ready for recovery. And the challenge is if when loved ones, well-meaning, well-intended, but try to point out the obvious to me, I'm not going to hear of it because they're actually more in touch with my life than I am. Not really. They just think they are. There's a lot of delusion with codependency. We think we know everything, which is another problem. And it's like a man or a woman sticking their hand in the fire, and the other person feels the pain and says, get it out. Or I'm trying to get it out. You're killing yourself with this. And it's like, what are you yapping about? I'm just fine. Stop telling me what to do. Well, I'm numb from my addiction, and they're feeling the consequences of my behavior. They're feeling my conscience. And so they're really motivated to try to get me to stop while my hand's kind of in flames. So one has to detach, DETACH. Don't even think about changing him. Okay. So let's talk about codependency as an addiction. The codependent struggles with owning their own sense of reality. We struggle with feeling our feelings, and we want to feel other people's feelings, and we feel better if they're better, if they, in essence, do what we want them to do, which is to get sober. And we can't tolerate the pain and discomfort of them not being sober or doing what we want them to do. So then we numb ourselves with their life. And we really, really don't think we have as many problems as they do. This goes all the way back to a Bible verse where Jesus is talking about, why are you taking, trying to pick the speck, a little splinter out of your brother's eye when you have a beam or a log in your own eye. Yeah, codependency is way back then. We have groups of people trying to fix our lives, or countries trying to fix other countries' lives, when really we'd be better off just working on our own life. That's where I'm at my best, is when I'm not trying to help others, especially when they're not asking for help. They're not asking for advice. Okay. So, how it's addictive is it's compulsive. I know it's harming me and them, but I can't stop myself. It's very short term. Like I got to get a fix. I've got to look at her cell phone just to see if she's doing something inappropriate, or I've got to help my loved one who struggles with weight by just putting a little public information about, hey, this has 5 grams of fat. Yeah, that's the stuff where it never really works. Okay. So I believe this with all my heart, that as a codependent recovers, we detach. They start to feel the effects of their addiction, and the blood supply begins to go away. And so we admit we're powerless over fixing anybody else, and our lives have become unmanageable. Let's see. Yeah, I love this. Dr. Silkworth says, I do not hold with those who believe that alcoholism or addiction is entirely a problem of mental control. Like codependency, we were just talking about it a minute ago. There's lots of books on codependency, and they may describe the problem, but it's not a matter just, hey, I just won't be codependent anymore. I had a client who said, well, I read the book, I'm not going to be codependent anymore. And I kind of smiled to myself and said, well, good luck on that. I think it's good that they start that way, but it's not treated that way. One has to have, in my experience, a psychic change. It says these men were not drinking to escape. This is page XXVIII 28. They were drinking to overcome a craving beyond their mental control. There are classifications of alcoholism or addiction. And I think this is very interesting. We'll go over this. The classification of alcoholics seems most difficult, and in much detail is outside the scope, of this book. Now, when I go through the steps, I do like 1, 2, and 3, especially when it's talking about step work, like do this, then do this, and this. It's like, think of how do I put this into action? In this case, it's describing different types. So the first type, there are, and this isn't perfect, by the way. I think if they wrote it today, it would look different because some of the language is different. We just don't use this language. One, there are, of course, psychopaths who are emotionally unstable. We're all familiar with this type. They are always going on the wagon for keeps. They are overly remorseful and make many resolutions, but never decisions. So it would be laughable because when we think psychopath, we think of the psychopathic killer. Do you think they're emotionally unstable? Of course they are. They're always going on the wagon from killing people. And they're overly remorseful? No. And they make resolutions. I'm not going to try to kill someone this week. Yeah, no. So psychopath probably means someone with some kind of psychopathology. That's just the way to think about it. Today, we would see alcoholism as part of psychopathology. Okay. But if we look at it through the eyes of it, they see that alcoholism is a disease of spiritual, and because they'll say spiritual disease, but the body was sickened as well, and our mind is sickened. That what they're emphasizing is someone with some kind of mental illness or emotional illness, like depression, anxiety. They could be talking about bipolar disorder, but they're always going on the wagon for keeps, and they're overly remorseful, making many resolutions, but never a decision. Yes, I know of people with this. And a lot of times they just have to bottom out. And I always try to believe that maybe this time they'll get sober. Then there is the type of man or woman who is unwilling to admit that they cannot take a drink. I would say, yeah, they just don't really see that they have codependency. They don't see that they have sex addiction. They don't have compulsive overeating. And it's kind of the control approach. He plans various ways of drinking or overeating or whatever. He changes his brand. Say, like, I'll go become a vegan, but I'm still obsessed with the aspect of eating and food. So I just changed it a little bit. Or a person with sexual addiction, and I don't mean to be overly graphic, but I think it's important to say because people struggle with this, is that they just won't do maybe illegal sexual behaviors or behaviors that are more perverse or things that people really think are out there, but then they're just going to look at pornography and masturbate, and that would be fine. Okay. 3, there is the type who always believes that after being entirely free from alcohol for a period of time, he can take a drink without danger. And let's superimpose the idea of compulsive spending. We'll go there a little bit. Back to number 2, the compulsive spender in number 2, it's like, okay, they change how they spend. They may use a limit. They may just not use credit cards, but unless they work the steps, the disease is still there. There are people that believe that they're entirely free for a period of time, and then they can take a drink again. So this might be the compulsive binger. And this could be the person who's lost all the weight, got down to their ideal weight. Now they feel like they can eat donuts or whatever their trigger food in Overeaters Anonymous talk would be. Now, a trigger food is defined as a food that is like a drug. And people in recovery and Overeaters Anonymous, I'm not trying to speak for them, but this is my experiences. I find that those foods, if I just stay away, I'm fine. In fact, I really believe now the food manufacturers are manufacturing drugs with some of the flavorings and some of the sugar and stuff. They're just making us compulsive. And if we stay away from these foods, it's like, well, fine. And I'll throw this out that in Overeaters Anonymous, they say a trigger food is one that causes you to overeat anything once you eat it. Okay. So number 3, the binging and there is the manic depressive type who is perhaps the least understood by his friends and about whom a whole chapter could be written. That's kind of self-explanatory. But this one, why this is key, and people go, this is the one, this is the type of addict I want to be. There are the types entirely normal in every respect, except in the effect alcohol or lust or spending or gambling or even opiate addiction has upon them. They are often able, intelligent, friendly people. And I believe that there's lots of people, they are fine, I mean, they look easygoing, they're able to work, they function just quite well, except where they are, they feel like I have an addiction now. And this is what I also believe. I'm not there to tell anybody that they're an addict. People come in, well, just tell me no, that's not my job. It's something that your own self-enlightened interest. That's a phrase from Sexaholics Anonymous, but you have to get to a place where you decide for yourself, this is not working for you. That's the simplest way to kind of assess, am I an alcoholic or addict? Is it really working? If you cut down at all, here's an extra thing. I'm going to try to do this at the same time. It's called CAGE, C-A-G-E. C is for cut down. A is for annoyed. G is for guilt. And E is for eye opener. So cutting down, have I ever cut down the behavior? Have I ever decided, you know what, I can't eat this much? Or I got to cut down on my spending? Or I got to cut down on the amount of liquor in my life? Or I got to cut down on the amount of drugs or marijuana, etc. 2, annoyed. Has anybody been annoyed with my behavior? A spouse? If it's a no, then that might not be an addiction. But usually with addiction, there is an annoyance. Like, I mean, it may be an understatement if a spouse finds out one's using sexuality for an addiction or spent all the money or gone to the casino and lied about it. Okay. Guilt. If I don't have a problem with mustard, I use mustard a lot as a, if I've never had to cut down on mustard, no one's been annoyed by my use of mustard. I don't feel guilty using mustard on my sandwiches. So, but addiction, if I feel guilty, if I felt any kind of guilt, it's probably a problem. And then the last one is eye opener. Now, this is what's funny because the first 3, a lot of people, but an eye opener is this idea that I have to have a drink in the morning. Other addictions, if one has to do their addictions right in the morning to function, then it's probably a problem. Okay. Let's see. All these and many others have one symptom in common. They cannot start drinking or their drug without developing the phenomenon of craving. This phenomenon, as we have suggested, may be the manifestation of an allergy which differentiates these people and sets them apart as distinct entity. It has never been, by any treatment with which we are familiar, permanently eradicated. The only relief we have is to suggest is entire abstinence. Okay. And again, people will say, I don't want this program that's just so all or nothing. And that's fine. That's their prerogative. Who am I or anybody else to tell them not to drink at all? But what I found is when an alcoholic or any holic accepts that, you know what, I can't tolerate lust in any form. There has to be focus on healthy sexual expression, or I can't, and we're talking about behavioral addictions like food. There are certain foods that a person says, you know what, it's just better off if I stay away from this. Or I got to abstain from seconds, whatever. And again, people go, this is like impossible. Actually, with God's grace, nothing's impossible. And people don't miss it. What is there to miss? All the misery, the depression, the humiliation, the shame, the energy wasted, the fears, all that, the resentments. Yeah. Work has to be done in moderation. Compulsive gambling, people can live without. They don't need to gamble. And I know people in recovery that will not even participate in a church raffle because that would be gambling. And they do a fine job at that. Let's see. What is the solution? And we'll read a story. Perhaps I can best answer this by relating one of my experiences. About 1 year prior to this experience, a man was brought in to be treated for chronic alcoholism. This is, by the way, XXIX, which is 29. He had partially recovered from a gastric hemorrhage and seemed to be the case of pathological mental deterioration. He had lost everything worthwhile in life and was only living, one might say, to drink. He frankly admitted and believed that for him there was no hope. By the way, that's steps 1. Okay. Bill, and you can find this on the internet, talks about this list of 6 items. And one of them is hopelessness, which really gets translated into hopelessness in oneself. Okay. Following the elimination of alcohol or any kind of addiction you're struggling with, there was found to be no permanent brain damage or injury. He accepted the plan outlined in this book. What is the plan? The 12 steps. 1 year later, he called to see me, and I experienced a very strange sensation. I knew the man by name and partly recognized his features, but there all resemblance ended. From a trembling, despairing, nervous wreck had emerged a man brimming over with self-reliance and contentment. So self-reliance, I'm going to twist here. Later in this book, it talks about all fears are a matter of self-reliance. I believe that it's self-reliance in God, that it's really God-reliance. He talks about when he needs a mental uplift, he often thinks of another case brought in by a physician prominent in New York. The patient had made his own diagnosis and decided his situation was hopeless. Had hidden in a deserted barn, determined to die. He was rescued by a searching party and in a desperate condition brought to me, again, Dr. Silkworth. Following his physical rehabilitation, he had a talk with me in which he frankly stated he thought the treatment a waste of effort. unless I could assure him, which no one had ever had in the future, that he would have the willpower to resist the impulse to drink. His alcoholic problem was so complex and his depression so great that we felt his only hope would be through what we called then moral psychology, and we doubted if even that would have any effect. However, he became sold on the ideas contained in this book. He has not had a drink for a great many years. I see him now and then, and he is as fine a specimen of manhood as one could ever wish to meet. Okay. What a beautiful story. And that's my life, from my own recovery and addictions. Yeah, boy, I can't imagine if I didn't recover where I'd be. Um, I just thankful. And in fact, maybe I take it for granted that I have the life I have today. I should be ever so thankful to God for that. Ever so thankful for the people in the rooms. That's would be where I need to be. So we will talk more about step 1 in the next video. We'll continue on focusing on the passages that deal with the admission of powerlessness and looking at the unmanageability. You take care and have a great day in recovery.